Bryan Burrough, Forget the Alamo, The Rise and Fall of an American Myth. Embark on a journey through time as we debunk the myths and uncover the true stories behind the Battle of the Alamo in Forget the Alamo, The Rise and Fall of an American Myth by Bryan Burrough. Far from the heroic and noble tale that we've been taught, the real story reveals how slavery, greed, and opportunism played pivotal roles in the events leading to the battle. Delve into the origins of the conflict, the significance of historical figures like James Bowie, William Travis, and Davy Crockett, and learn about the fascinating interplay between Anglo-Americans, Tejanos, and the Mexican government.
Unraveling the Alamo's origins. The Alamo's story, often portrayed as a heroic Texan's battle for freedom, has a deeper, more complex history rooted in cotton and slavery. The cotton gin's invention in 1794 revolutionized production, creating new opportunities for wealth in the American South, reliant on slave labor. This economic boom saw enslaved populations increase exponentially, driving the demand for more land, leading settlers to the cheap land of Texas. At first, under Mexican control and Spanish rule, land ownership was not an issue, as both cultures did not oppose owning slaves. However, this would dramatically change, resulting in the eventual confrontation at the Alamo. Rather than the simple heroic tale fed to Texan children by law, the true story of the Alamo revolves around the quest for wealth and the continued exploitation of enslaved people. This darker, less championed tale traces the roots of the conflict to the cotton gin's invention, and the economic boom it sparked. This newfound prosperity saw the number of enslaved individuals in the U.S. rise from 900,000 in 1800 to around 4 million in 1860. Driven by economic success and the need for more land to farm cotton, people ventured into Texas. Though the region was under Mexican control, the permeable border and Spanish rule initially allowed for slave ownership, creating a sense of harmony among settlers. However, this deceptive peace soon crumbled. As the settlers' aspirations clashed with Mexico's changing political landscape, the stage was set for a confrontation that would forever etch itself into history as the Battle of the Alamo. In reality, the fight was less about liberty and freedom for all, and more about securing personal wealth and interests. Looking beyond the sanitized, state-mandated narratives about the Alamo, we discover a more complex and sobering history entrenched in economic ambition and slavery. Only by understanding these deeper roots can we truly appreciate the Alamo's significance as a nexus for critical events in American and Texan history. Settlers, borders, and independence. In the early 19th century, Spain invited American settlers to Texas, boosting their efforts against Native Americans. U.S. presidents aimed to expand their territories further, and the Mexicans sought assistance to gain independence from Spain. Mexican independence brought changes for Anglo settlers, such as the unexpected abolition of slavery. This principle clashed with the settlers' cotton farming businesses. However, Stephen F. Austin, a diplomatic leader, negotiated with the new Mexican government, leading to several compromises. The distance between Texas and Mexico City ensured a hands-off government, but the abolishment of slavery created uncertainty among Texians and potential newcomers. Long before the iconic American image of cowboys and wide-open Texas landscapes, Spain welcomed American settlers into their territory, fighting against common indigenous adversaries. U.S. presidents, such as James Madison and James Monroe, had a keen eye on the region, vying for opportunities to redraw territorial boundaries. However, Mexico had its own motives for embracing the American settlers. Desperate to free themselves from their Spanish overlords, they sought support to win independence. Nonetheless, the call for assistance attracted smugglers, pirates, and ill-intentioned adventurers to the area. In 1813, Mexico's determination to gain independence led to violent conflicts between Anglo and Tejano rebels and the Spanish in Texas. Although the Spanish emerged victorious in the bloody Battle of Medina, Mexico ultimately achieved freedom from Spanish rule in 1821. But the changes brought about by this new nation presented unexpected challenges for the Anglo settlers in Texas. One of the cornerstones of Mexican independence strove for the abolition of slavery, emphasizing equality among all people. This sentiment, though righteous, spelled disaster for the Anglos' cotton farming businesses, which heavily relied on slave labor. Concerns arose among the settlers, but help was on the way. Stephen F. Austin, a revered diplomat and leader later nicknamed the Father of Texas, tirelessly sought to bridge the gap between Texians and the Mexican government. Austin journeyed to Mexico City multiple times to negotiate on behalf of the Texians. Ultimately, the Mexican government never legalized slavery. However, they demonstrated a capacity for compromise, mitigating the settlers' concerns. Despite the concessions, the physical distance between Texas and Mexico City guaranteed relaxed governance by the new Mexican authorities. This remoteness, however, could not appease the growing fear among Texians that their livelihoods were at risk under the anti-slavery stance of the government. Furthermore, this stance discouraged new settlers who relied on slave labor to work the land, setting the stage for continued tensions in the years to come. Unmasking Alamo's flawed heroes. Texas was historically seen as a place for fresh starts, attracting both hard-working families and unsavory characters alike. Among the latter category were the infamous swindlers Pierre and Jean Lafitte. Contrary to popular belief, many Alamo rebels were morally ambiguous, with some even profiting from illegal activities such as slave trading. Three celebrated Alamo heroes, Jim Bowie, Davy Crockett, and William Travis, had less than heroic intentions behind their presence in Texas. Investigating the facts reveals that these figures, along with others, were not necessarily fighting for honorable purposes but were rather seeking refuge from the consequences of their actions. Texas has long been seen as a land of second chances, a fresh start for those needing a clean slate. This appealed to everyone, honest, hard-working folks and unscrupulous individuals such as swindlers and criminals alike. The infamous Pierre and Jean Lafitte, for example, operated from Galveston Island off Texas's coast, where they trafficked stolen goods and engaged in illegal slave trading. In reality, they were just two of many individuals who thrived on the less-than-savory side of Texas's reputation. A common misconception about the Anglo rebels at the Alamo paints them as virtuous and morally upstanding, in stark contrast to the supposed savagery of Mexican forces. However, historical records reveal that the Mexican government often compromised on contentious issues like slavery to placate the settlers, allowing them to retain their enslaved laborers. A closer look at the records also challenges the heroic image of the Alamo's so-called Holy Trinity of heroes, which includes Bowie, Crockett, and Travis. Each man arrived in Texas carrying their own questionable pasts. Jim Bowie was a notorious brawler, slave trader, and con artist. Davy Crockett's failed political career hinged on embroidered tales of his frontier exploits, and William Travis, deep in debt and evading arrest, sought refuge in the Texan region. Far from being defenders of freedom and liberty, these men ended up in Texas due to their troubled pasts and lack of other options. Understanding their true nature sheds a more realistic light on the motivations driving the Alamo rebels and reveals how their mythology has often overshadowed the actual events that took place. Road to the Alamo. The uneasy relationship between Texas settlers and Mexico in the early 1830s was complicated by increasing tensions, diverging interests and a small group of agitators, known as the War Dogs, that ultimately led to the Battle of the Alamo. The initial success of Texas settlements was hindered by Mexico's abolitionist stance, making it harder to attract new settlers. Additionally, prominent settler Stephen Austin believed Texas must be a slave country, contributing to the heated debates and discontentment. The period between 1832 and 1835 saw Texas and Mexico inching closer to war. In the initial stage of 1834, relations between Texas settlers and the Mexican government seemed redeemable, despite violence at Fort Velasco. Austin had managed to convince the Mexican government to ease immigration restrictions on Americans entering Mexico. However, Austin's arrest in January 1834 for an intercepted letter discussing a state constitution for Texas seemingly confirmed suspicions of treason, further straining the relationship. Amidst the escalating tensions, a small group of about a dozen men, known as the War Dogs, were eager to revolt. This group, which included Jim Bowie and William Travis, was not representative of Texas's ordinary citizens. Instead, they often stirred up trouble, exacerbating the situation. Their agitation eventually led to an increased Mexican military presence in Texas, which the group used to suggest an imminent invasion. It is worth noting that Mexican President Santa Anna was initially perceived as a federalist, advocating for a decentralized government and autonomy for individual states. This aligned with the interests of rebellious Texians at the time. However, Santa Anna's rule became more authoritarian over time, leading to disenchantment among the Texian population. The president regarded the Texians as ungrateful and law-breaking immigrants in need of discipline. In conclusion, the Texas settlement's future was clouded by factors such as Mexico's abolitionist policies and discordant sentiments. The situation spiraled, fueled by misunderstandings and the War Dogs' inflammatory actions. Santa Anna's changing political inclinations only intensified already strained relations, laying the groundwork for the fierce Battle of the Alamo the parties would face. Rising tensions at the Alamo. In 1835, tensions between Texians and the Mexican government escalated following Santa Anna's abolition of federalism in favor of a centralized government. A series of events involving William Travis and General Martín Perfecto de Cos eventually led to a standoff between Texian militiamen and Mexican troops at the Alamo, leaving a small, vulnerable group of soldiers in a precarious situation. The year 1835 marked a turning point in the relationship between Texians and the Mexican government. Santa Anna abolished federalism in favor of a more centralized approach, which angered the Texians who felt that their hope for autonomy had been crushed. Tejano, already upset by Santa Anna's authoritarian tactics, joined the Texians in their discontent. In August 1835, the situation worsened when Mexican Army General Martín Perfecto de Cos was tasked with the arrest of William Travis after Travis's unprovoked attack on Mexican troops. The Texians, initially shocked by Travis's actions, changed their sentiments when they heard of General Cos's arrival, fearing a Mexican invasion. However, General Cos merely sought to arrest Travis and restore order. Upon arriving in Texas, General Cos found an armed resistance waiting for him. He then ordered the confiscation of Texian arms, including a cannon located in the town of Gonzales. The showdown between 200 Mexican troops and Texas militiamen led to the display of a defiant flag featuring a cannon and the phrase, "Come and take it," which has since become an iconic symbol in Texas. Confused by the Texians' eagerness to fight, the Mexican military retreated to San Antonio, acquiring reinforcements. However, the Texian militiamen persisted, laying siege to San Antonio from November to December 1835. The Mexican forces retreated once more to the Alamo where General Cos ultimately surrendered, agreeing to leave Texas. Though the Texian militiamen had achieved another victory, this triumph left a combined force of Texian and Tejano soldiers in an extremely vulnerable state. Many of the soldiers, initially in it for a brief adventure, decided to leave as winter approached. The remaining group found themselves stationed at the Alamo, an old Spanish mission with low walls and exposure on all sides. The Mexican army had abandoned the Alamo as it was indefensible, but that didn't mean Santa Anna had given up the fight. The stage was set for a final showdown between Texian soldiers and Santa Anna's forces. The Alamo's unavoidable disaster. The Battle of the Alamo, a disastrous military encounter, could have been prevented with better planning and leadership. Inexperienced and unprepared commanders, such as William B. Travis, Jim Bowie, and Davy Crockett were chosen to defend the Alamo. Although the defenders were warned of the approaching Mexican army led by Santa Anna, pleas for reinforcements went unanswered as many considered the Alamo undefendable. Consequently, the fort was overtaken by Santa Anna's forces. Despite popular belief, not everyone's fate at the Alamo is a mystery, as accounts from Mexican soldiers and sole survivors have surfaced over time. The most crucial point from these accounts is that the tragic outcome may have been avoided with better foresight. During January and February of 1836, a few men, including Davy Crockett, aged 49, and Jim Bowie, around 40, joined the militia. William B. Travis was chosen as chief recruiting officer of the Alamo, despite being only 26 years old and lacking military experience. Shortly after arriving, Jim Bowie went on a drinking spree and caught a debilitating illness, leaving him bedridden during the battle. Tejano scouts had been warning Travis and Bowie for weeks that a massive Mexican army was en route to the Alamo from Presidio, a Spanish town along the Rio Grande. Despite Travis's desperate letters requesting reinforcements, none arrived. It is unclear whether Travis's faith in impending reinforcements, overconfidence, or stubbornness led to their decision to stay and defend the Alamo. Though Travis's pleas for help reached American Colonel James Fannin, he and his forces failed to reach the Alamo. He ordered over 300 soldiers, equipped with cannons, to march the 90-mile distance. However, this was a daunting task as few soldiers had proper footwear, wagons were breaking down, and oxen would escape. As a result, the march was abandoned. Sam Houston, the head of the Texas Army, was dubious of Travis's desperate letters, and many saw the Alamo as undefendable, rendering it a lost cause. Consequently, the Alamo was besieged by Santa Anna's forces, leading to a grim outcome for Travis and his men. In summary, the Battle of the Alamo was an avoidable military disaster that took place due to poor decisions, lack of preparation, and inadequate leadership. Our understanding of the event has deepened over time through accounts from Mexican soldiers and survivors, providing valuable insights into the factors that contributed to this historical tragedy. Unraveling the Alamo myth. The Battle of the Alamo, fought between Mexican troops under Santa Anna and Texan defenders, is often romanticized as a story of courage featuring valiant fighters Travis and Crockett. However, evidence shows that this iconic tale is not entirely accurate. Travis had actually sought to negotiate a surrender to avoid deadly consequences. Ultimately, despite a reasonably well-defended initial attack, the Mexican forces overpowered the defenders, leading to a tragic end. On the 12th day of the siege, March 5, 1836, the Alamo's walls were weakened by continuous cannon fire. The Mexican army assembled ladders in preparation to infiltrate the fragile defenses. At this precarious moment, Travis, realizing the inevitable doom they faced, reached out to Santa Anna through a Tejano woman to negotiate a surrender. He offered to give up the fight on the condition that no lives would be lost. However, Santa Anna dismissed the offer, demanding an unconditional surrender instead. Contrary to popular belief, famed fighters Travis and Crockett were not entirely committed to fighting until their last breath. In fact, the tale of Travis' attempted surrender contradicts the notion of unwavering bravery that typically characterizes the story of the Alamo. It casts doubt on the image of the defenders as fearless heroes fighting until the end. On the early hours of March 6, Santa Anna's troops, numbering around 1,800, launched their assault on the Alamo. Despite being taken by surprise, the defenders managed to resist the initial onslaught. The attackers' ladders could not support their weight, and shouts of "Viva Santa Anna" revealed their positions. This enabled the gunners on the walls to target them with ease. However, the situation took a turn when Travis was fatally wounded at the northern wall. As more Mexican soldiers poured in, the Alamo was eventually overrun. Upon breaching the defenses, Mexican forces pursued those trying to escape on horseback. Bowie was killed in his own bed, and Crockett was captured, only to be executed before Santa Anna's eyes. These accounts disprove the myth that every defender perished while fighting on the battlefield. In the aftermath of the battle, no prisoners were taken from the fallen Texan force. The survivors included Tejano women and children, an enslaved individual named Jo, Susanna Dickinson, and her infant daughter. It was these individuals who were spared by the Mexican army and went on to share their experiences, constructing the initial accounts of the legendary Battle of the Alamo. Birth of the Alamo myth. Jo and Susanna Dickinson, survivors of the Alamo, reached Sam Houston's camp in Gonzales on March 11, 1836, confirming the devastating rumors about the event. Houston retreated and began training over 1,000 new volunteers, using the Alamo's defeat as a symbol of inspiration akin to the Battle of Thermopylae. The Telegraph and Texas Register covered the event with many embellishments, showcasing outstanding bravery and sacrifice. This story swept across America, creating the heroic Alamo myth. With "Remember the Alamo" as their battle cry, Houston's forces eventually captured Santa Ana on April 21, 1836, and achieved their revenge in the Battle of San Jacinto. When Joe and Susanna Dickinson arrived at Sam Houston's camp in Gonzales on March 11, 1836, they brought news that confirmed the devastating fate of the Alamo. The grim reality of the situation was evident, but Houston saw an opportunity. Using this defeat, he rallied and trained over 1,000 new volunteers for his army, effectively shaping the legendary myth of the Alamo. Houston drew inspiration from the Battle of Thermopylae, where the outnumbered Spartans bravely faced off against the invading Persian army. He portrayed the Alamo in a similar light, highlighting the courage and determination of the fallen. This narrative gained momentum through the Telegraph and Texas Register, a prominent newspaper known for its propagandistic approach. The paper's articles described the soldiers' last moments with great drama, detailing their acts of defiance even in the face of certain death. They painted the Alamo not as a disaster, but as a glorious and heroic tragedy that united the people of Texas and fueled the call for vengeance against the Mexican army. This inspiring tale began circulating across America, with some outlets adding further details to the story, transforming it into a romanticized legend. This myth was ingrained into the hearts of the Texas Army, and they went into battle with renewed fervor, driven by the memory of their fallen comrades. The cry of "Remember the Alamo" echoed through their ranks as they marched forward on April 21, 1836, in the area of San Jacinto. Under Houston's guidance, the Texas Army surprised Santa Anna's troops, catching them off guard. Recalling the Alamo, their swift and fierce attack prevailed, capturing Santa Ana just 18 minutes into the battle. Houston's forces pursued their revenge with a brutal onslaught, pillaging and decimating the enemy camp. The victory at San Jacinto was fueled by the myth of the Alamo, a testament to the transformative power of a story that turned a tragic loss into an inspiring symbol of hope and resistance. Debunking the Alamo myth. The popular Alamo mythology has long overshadowed the contributions of the Tejano who fought alongside the Anglo heroes in the battle for Texas independence. As a result, a monolithic and misinformed narrative evolved, marginalizing and vilifying non-white rebels, especially within the Latino community. However, since the 1960s, revisionist history has begun to replace misconceptions with nuanced, accurate reinstatement of their heroic efforts, inspiring waves of critical examinations and more inclusive perspectives on the storied event. The Alamo, a pivotal moment in Texas's fight for independence, became an essential part of the state's origin story. Illustrious figures like Presidents Lyndon B. Johnson and George W. Bush used this analogy to motivate the public, further solidifying its significance. However, the ensuing popular myth eclipsed Tejano critical contributions, who fought alongside the Anglo heroes for Texas independence. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, harmful stereotypes of non-white rebels became prevalent as they were inaccurately and unfairly grouped with the enemy. Derogatory terms, such as "greasers," came into use to describe all Mexicans, perpetuating discrimination and reinforcing the exclusionary narrative. Latino populations in Texas have borne the brunt of this Alamo myth, often facing alienation and feeling like outsiders among their white classmates when the legendary battle's story is passed down in school curriculum. Revisionist history began in the 1960s, attempting to correct misconceptions and shed light on the undeniable fact: the diverse ensemble of heroes at the Alamo has long been overlooked. Walter Lord's book, A Time to Stand, led the charge in dismantling the myth by seeking a more accurate portrayal of events. His work sparked a surge of scrutiny, culminating in Jeff Long's incisive 1990s work Duel of Eagles, which unveiled the moral ambiguity of key figures like Travis and Bowie. Long's boldness in exposing these injustices led to hostility from those clinging to the romanticized narrative, but it paved the way for a more inclusive retelling of what truly transpired at the Alamo. Debunking Alamo myths. Gradually breaking away from the heroic Alamo mythology, Texas now acknowledges the diverse roles in this historical event. Although progress has been made, the fight over the Alamo's true meaning continues. Former custodians, the Daughters of the Republic of Texas, lost their position due to mismanagement, and new efforts are being made to transform the Alamo into an inclusive and accurate representation. However, resistance is evident, and the proposed additions of Phil Collins' artifact collection, with its questionable authenticity, might remain a subject of debate on whether some parts of the Alamo's history are best left forgotten. For generations, many Texans clung on to the romanticized version of the Alamo's history, a testament to nobility and bravery. However, recent education reforms now include Tejano representation in the narrative, while historical consensus is moving toward debunking the heroic myth. In reality, the Texas Revolt had more to do with preserving slavery than combating Mexican oppression. The Alamo, once a site venerating the myth, now grapples with presenting a more accurate account. This shift became possible after the Daughters of the Republic of Texas, who were determined to maintain the myth, lost their custodianship due to mismanagement and negligence. Consequently, control reverted to the state, with Commissioner George P. Bush now overseeing its transformation into a comprehensive destination. The initial plans for the renovated Alamo site aimed to provide an inclusive and accurate portrayal of events. However, not everyone is pleased with these changes, as evidenced by armed protesters defending traditional monuments. Adding to the debate is the proposed addition of musician Phil Collins' Alamo artifacts. Known as an Alamo head, Collins amassed a vast collection of supposed Alamo relics, yet their authenticity is highly questionable. Many items lack proper provenance, and their validation is based merely on gut feelings from friendly collectors. The uncertain nature of Collins' collection, much like the popular Alamo myth, raises doubts about its place in the newly renovated site. The ongoing debate may lead to a re-evaluation of the Alamo's history and whether the myth should be completely deconstructed or left forgotten. In rewriting this crucial history, a more inclusive and accurate representation of the Alamo should be the priority.
As we wrap up our exploration of the Alamo's past, it becomes clear that the Alamo myth is a far cry from the reality of the events it represents. What is often portrayed as a heroic stand for liberty was, in fact, a disaster rooted in the quest for land and the entrenchment of slave-based economies. In recent years, an effort to present a more accurate, inclusive history of the Alamo has begun, but the hard-fought debate over the Alamo's meaning continues. As Texan and American history evolves, perhaps it's time to adopt a more truthful understanding of the events that unfolded at the Alamo and the motivations behind them.